The room stiffened the moment she approached. No announcement, no theatrics, just her presence cutting through the polished quiet like a question no one wanted to answer. Eyes flicked up, judgments locked in. To them, she didn't fit the script, black, alone, commanding without saying a word. Before a single form was filled, before a single question asked, they had already decided who she was, and more importantly, who she wasn't. But what they didn't see was the storm behind her silence, the wire transfer already in motion, and the name that would soon rattle their entire institution. They thought they were denying a stranger. They were insulting a powerhouse. Stick around. This story builds slow, hits hard, and ends where no one expects. Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. You won't want to miss what comes next. Sloan Merritt entered Iron Trust Bank just before noon, the sun flashing off the gold-trimmed revolving doors as she stepped into a space that reeked of affluence. It was a kind of institution where the floors glistened like black ice and every inch smelled of polished wood, leather, and caution. She carried a folder tucked under her arm, smooth brown leather containing the official papers of Merritt Strategies, her rapidly growing fintech firm. A long conference call had just wrapped, and this was supposed to be a simple errand. Open a business account to handle new capital flowing in from her latest investors. Simple. Until she met the eyes of the teller. Behind the business account desk sat Cheryl Dobbins, with her crisp blazer, ivory blouse, and glasses hanging from a golden chain that matched her wedding ring. Her eyes scanned Sloan from her pressed slacks to her patent leather heels, and they narrowed with a mixture of disinterest and disdain. She didn't offer the usual good afternoon. She didn't even fake a customer service smile. Instead, she frowned slightly, the way one might react to finding a coffee stain on a linen suit. "This is the business account desk," Cheryl said, her voice devoid of warmth. Sloan approached, unfazed. "I know. I'm here to open one. Corporate account, treasury level if available. I brought all the required documents." Cheryl let out a breath, like she'd been asked to work overtime. "Do you have an appointment?" "I was told by phone this branch takes walk-ins if all the forms are in order," Sloan answered, producing her folder. Cheryl didn't touch it. She leaned back in her chair like it was an insult. "What type of business is this?" "Financial technology. We provide back-end solutions to investment advisors. It's a Delaware-registered LLC." Sloan opened the folder and held it out patiently. "We just completed Series B funding." Cheryl tilted her head slightly, like she was hearing a foreign language. "Series B," she repeated slowly. "Yes," Sloan replied, maintaining her composure. "Funding round." Cheryl didn't reach for the folder. Instead, she turned her attention to a stack of blank forms beside her. "Have you had an account with Iron Trust before?" "No," Sloan said. "That's why I'm here." Cheryl clicked her pen twice and then stopped. "Well, normally for new businesses, we begin with a basic business checking account. Something more accessible. The accounts you're asking for, corporate and treasury, those are typically reserved for clients with high liquidity and established banking history, not startups." Sloan's fingers tightened on the edge of her folder. "I'm not a startup. My company has 7 employees and clients in 4 states. This isn't a request, it's an application." A silence stretched between them. Cheryl pursed her lips and finally, reluctantly, took the folder. She leafed through the documents with detached efficiency, occasionally glancing at Sloan like she might spot a forgery. "What's your role with the business?" she asked. Sloan blinked once. "I'm the founder and CEO." Cheryl raised an eyebrow. "The sole owner?" Sloan nodded. 100%. More silence. Cheryl's jaw worked for a moment before she rose from her chair. "I need to speak with my branch manager," she said, already walking away with Sloan's folder in hand. Sloan watched her disappear behind a frosted glass door. Around her, the room seemed to hum with subtle tension. A young man in line behind her gave a glance, then looked away. A woman at the next desk gave a half smile of sympathy but said nothing. After 12 minutes, Cheryl returned, alone. "He's tied up with another client," she said with a sniff. "But I've looked through your materials, and while they're technically complete, we have to be cautious with high-risk industries." Tech startups sometimes shift quickly or close without warning. And we need more verification of your revenue sources. Do you have recent tax returns? Sloane's breath caught in her chest. Are you serious? Cheryl's eyes hardened. Ma'am, we're a private financial institution. We reserve the right to deny accounts that don't meet our criteria. Your website lists corporate accounts as available to businesses with a legal entity, ID, and proof of address, Sloane said. Her tone clipped. I have all of those. Cheryl shrugged. Policy isn't always detailed online. Just then, the branch manager appeared, a tall, ruddy-faced man in a blue vest and striped tie. Cheryl whispered something to him. He nodded and turned to Sloane. Hi there, I'm Robert Langston. Cheryl mentioned you're looking to open a corporate account, he asked, glancing at the folder in her hands. That's right. Well, Robert began, his voice pleasant but distant. Typically, we do that for existing clients or firms with over $500,000 in average monthly deposits. It's a bit of a specialized product. For new relationships, we start with a basic structure and grow from there. She walked back through those polished doors with the same folder tucked under her arm, determined to be heard. Cheryl Dobbins was once again at the business desk, her fingers tapping lazily on the keyboard, her eyes flitting toward the entrance. The moment she spotted Sloane, her posture straightened, but the reaction was anything but welcoming. Her mouth tightened into that same insincere line she'd used the day before. Without a word of greeting, she nodded curtly toward the counter. Sloane stepped forward, not waiting to be summoned. Good morning, she said, her tone restrained. I'd like to continue the process of opening my business account. I brought the additional documents you requested. Cheryl looked down at her keyboard, then slowly back up at Sloane with a kind of exaggerated caution that suggested suspicion more than service. Do you have documentation proving you're the actual owner? She asked, voice lowered, as if they were sharing a secret or dealing with sensitive, dangerous material. Yes, Sloane replied, setting down the folder and flipping to the Articles of Incorporation. My name is listed as the sole member and managing agent. Everything is notarized. You can verify it with the state business registry. Cheryl leaned in slightly, her eyes squinting at the paperwork, not touching it, just scanning like a bouncer inspecting a fake ID. Her voice dipped further. And the money being deposited, is that personal funds or from investors? The pause between personal and investors hung in the air like a challenge. Sloane didn't flinch. Institutional investors. Venture capital from Pacific Equinox and Harding Street Capital. It's all verifiable. Cheryl tapped her pen once on the desk, then finally reached for the folder, dragging it toward her like it might bite. Her eyes darted across the pages, but never softened, never offered the validation of acknowledgement. Behind Sloane, the line had grown. The man directly behind her, white mid-40s, dressed in sweats and holding nothing but a car key and a Starbucks cup, was waved forward by a nearby teller without a single question. Hey Mark, the teller chirped. Back again? What's it today? Just a wire and a balance check, the man replied casually, sliding into the chair like it belonged to him. Sloane caught the exchange through the corner of her eye and felt her stomach twist. Cheryl, meanwhile, had begun typing into her terminal. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, her lips pressed together in an expression that bordered on disapproval. What's the nature of your business exactly? She asked again, despite already being told the day before. I help financial firms integrate digital investment tools. We license proprietary analytics software that enhances portfolio construction and predictive modeling. Cheryl raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. And how long has this company existed? Since 2018, Sloane replied. We pivoted during the pandemic and secured 2 rounds of funding. Cheryl gave a quiet hum that sounded like skepticism. Her fingers froze on the keyboard. We'll need to verify these companies. Harding Street and Pacific what? Pacific Equinox, Sloane answered, more firmly now. You can Google them. They're based in San Francisco. They've funded several public market disruptors. Cheryl scribbled the names down like she'd been handed a list of untested side hustles. You'll need to complete a business profile form and submit tax returns. I already submitted them electronically, Sloan said. Yesterday. Your manager has the folder. Cheryl pretended to search her desk, then said, "Well, it's not here now. We start fresh with each application to maintain compliance." "But you already have everything. Do you want to proceed or not, Ms. Merritt?" Cheryl's voice snapped suddenly louder, drawing stares from people nearby. "Because if not, I have other clients to help." Sloan swallowed hard, the burn of frustration sitting hot in her chest. She nodded slowly, taking the new packet of forms Cheryl pushed forward. The woman handed her a cheap plastic pen like she was doing her a favor, then sat back in her chair and began typing again, her eyes darting up occasionally, watching Sloan like a prison warden supervising a new inmate. The man who had been behind her had already finished his wire and walked out. This visit was about following up, confirming the progression of her account application, and holding the institution to the promises of their own policies. But from the moment Cheryl Dobbins looked up from her station, the tone was set. The woman's expression was the same, disapproving, smug, and mildly inconvenienced. Sloan gave a polite nod and calmly approached the counter. "Good morning. I'm checking on the status of my business account application. I was told I'd be contacted, but haven't heard anything." Cheryl leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Yes, Ms. Merritt. I remember. We're still in the review phase. These things take time, especially with corporate-level requests." Sloan kept her voice steady. "I'd appreciate a timeline. My company has funds ready to move, and delays affect operations." Cheryl raised an eyebrow and gave a short laugh, one that wasn't amused so much as patronizing. "Corporate-level accounts require high monthly cash flow, sweetheart. We need to verify sustainability before offering that kind of access." The word "sweetheart" struck Sloan like a slap, an intentional dismissal wrapped in faux familiarity. Her face remained still, but a flicker of fire danced behind her eyes. "What monthly cash flow are you referencing?" "I already submitted projected deposits, account activity, and client contracts. Those meet your thresholds." Cheryl gave a shrug, as if that didn't matter. She turned, retrieved a flyer from the rack behind her, and placed it on the counter with deliberate slowness. "Why don't we start with something more realistic?" she said, her fingers brushing the brochure across the counter with only 2 fingers, like she was handing over a parking citation. "This is a basic personal account with a business use option. Low fees, easy setup, might be more your speed while you grow." Sloan stared at the pamphlet. It was offensively elementary, designed for freelancers or sole proprietors without incorporated entities. It wasn't what she came here for. It wasn't what she had earned. And Cheryl knew it. Sloan didn't reach for the brochure. "Are you refusing to process my corporate account?" she asked, carefully enunciating every word. Cheryl tapped her pen once against the edge of her desk. "We haven't refused anything, but we can't guarantee approval until our compliance team is satisfied. And honestly, starting small could help you build some trust with us." Sloan leaned in slightly, her voice quieter but more intense. "I didn't come here to build trust. I came here to open an account to hold 8 figures in capital. You've had everything you need since day one." Cheryl's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, I'm doing my job. If you're unhappy with our process, you're welcome to try another institution." The implication wasn't subtle. She was being invited to leave, to walk away silently and be someone else's problem. A problem, that's what they saw. Not a professional, not a client, a disruption, a question mark. Sloan reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a business card, and placed it on the counter. "This is the contact for Harding Street Capital. You can verify directly with them if you need additional proof. They wired the first tranche last week." Cheryl glanced at the card without picking it up. "I'll pass it along," she said without commitment. Then she turned in her chair, pulled up her terminal, and began typing without another word. Sloan stood there for another moment, waiting to be acknowledged. She had gathered letters from investors, bank references from previous institutions, and even a statement from her attorney confirming Merritt Strategies' legal and financial standing. If they were going to keep moving the goalposts, she would bring the whole damn field. The lobby was less busy that morning, but the same chill hung in the air the moment Cheryl spotted her. This time, Sloane didn't wait to be acknowledged. She approached the desk with controlled urgency and placed the folder down without a word. Cheryl looked at it as if it might contain something contagious. "You again," she said flatly, not bothering to hide her disdain. Sloane spoke evenly. "I'm here to finish this. Every item you've asked for is in this folder. If there's still an issue, I'd like to speak to your supervisor today." Cheryl opened the folder with theatrical reluctance, flipping through the pages like they were junk mail. "You're very persistent," she muttered, loud enough for two nearby customers to hear. Sloane didn't respond. Her face was neutral, but her jaw was tight. Cheryl paused on a document, squinting at it. "Harding Street Capital," she read aloud, her tone dripping with skepticism. "And who exactly did you say you were again?" Sloane took a breath. "Sloane Merritt, founder and CEO of Merritt Strategies, a registered and operating financial technology consultancy." Cheryl gave a dry laugh and leaned back, raising her voice. "We can't just open accounts for anyone off the street claiming to own a business." The words echoed, not because they were loud, but because they were meant to be heard. A man in line turned his head. A woman near the entrance stopped mid-conversation. Sloane stood still, heat flooding her face, not from embarrassment, but from the fire of being publicly questioned, publicly reduced. "I'm not just anyone," she said firmly. "I brought more documentation than most people who walk through this door." Cheryl scoffed. "You've brought a lot of paper. That doesn't mean it's real. Do you know how many people try to scam their way into high-tier accounts?" That was it. Sloane stepped back and gestured toward the lobby. "Then call your manager. Right now." Cheryl rolled her eyes and hit a button on her desk phone. "Robert to the business counter, please," she said, sounding bored. Moments later, Robert Langston emerged from a glass office across the lobby, holding a coffee and looking mildly irritated. He approached with the same mechanical smile he'd used days before. "Ms. Merritt back again," he said. "What seems to be the problem now?" Cheryl didn't wait. "She says she's got a business, some kind of consulting, and she's insisting on a corporate account." She handed him the folder. "It's all in there." Robert flipped through the documents and frowned, not at their content, but as if annoyed by the inconvenience of them. "Let's have a seat over here," he said, motioning to a nearby consultation desk. Sloane followed, refusing to sit until he did. Robert skimmed the papers, his lips pursed. "What exactly is your business?" he asked, setting the folder down. "Tech-based financial services. We develop and license tools that help investment firms manage and predict asset flows. I have clients in New York, D.C., and Chicago." Robert leaned back. "So like braids and lashes or something online?" The moment the words left his mouth, the room felt different. Cheryl froze at her desk. The man behind Sloane looked up. Someone gasped quietly. Sloane blinked, stunned not because of confusion, but because the insult was so brazen it momentarily knocked the air out of her. "No," she said slowly. "I just told you exactly what it is. I'm not here for a salon license. I'm not selling cosmetics. I'm managing millions in capital." Robert's face didn't change. He looked at her like she was exaggerating. "Look," he said, "I'm not trying to offend you. I just need to understand the nature of your operation. We don't want to create accounts that later get flagged for suspicious activity." "You mean like money laundering?" Sloane asked, her voice sharp. "Because that's a serious accusation." Robert held up his hands. "I'm just explaining the risk." She had investors waiting on confirmation, and payroll was approaching fast. If she didn't secure an account with appropriate treasury-level functionality, she'd risk damaging her firm's momentum. She stepped inside with her head held high, though her nerves fluttered like trapped birds. The lobby was more crowded today. The air buzzed with quiet conversations, but the moment Cheryl spotted her, the energy shifted again. Cheryl's nostrils flared as she stood behind the counter, and the fake professionalism she usually wore slipped for just a second. "Back again," she murmured under her breath, loud enough to be heard. Sloane stood firm in front of the counter, folder in hand, but before she could speak, Cheryl raised her voice just slightly. Still trying to push through that account? She asked, no longer even pretending this was a neutral interaction. Sloan didn't answer immediately. She placed a folder on the counter and said in a steady tone, I'm here to follow up on the corporate account you escalated to compliance. I was told I'd be contacted. I haven't been. Cheryl sighed theatrically and picked up her phone. Let me get the manager again. Maybe this time we'll get a final word. Sloan noticed the sarcasm. The line behind her was building, customers beginning to glance her way. Within moments, a new manager appeared, Colin Leach, Regional Operations Supervisor, known for his corporate polish and stony demeanor. His gray suit looked expensive, but his eyes were colder than Robert's had ever been. He stopped short of the desk and gave Sloan a once-over glance, then turned to Cheryl. What's going on here? Cheryl handed him the folder. Same request as before. She's been in multiple times. Still wants a corporate account. Says she has millions ready to deposit. Colin opened the folder and flipped through the documents briefly, then handed them back to Cheryl like they were unremarkable. Let's not waste time here if it's not a high-net client, he said clearly, projecting his voice just enough to carry to the waiting customers. Sloan's breath caught in her throat. The dismissal wasn't subtle this time. It was intentional, deliberate, designed to communicate something not just to her, but to everyone within earshot. Her presence was not only unwelcome, it was a disruption to the bank's image. Excuse me, she said, trying to stay calm. What exactly are you basing that on? You haven't even reviewed the documents. Colin's lips barely moved. We've reviewed enough. Our institution reserves the right to choose its clients. High-tier corporate accounts require confidence in long-term revenue streams, and frankly, we haven't seen that here. Because you haven't looked, she replied, voice rising slightly. You've made assumptions based on nothing but your own, ma'am, Cheryl interrupted, a smirk creeping across her face. You're becoming disruptive. Please lower your voice. Sloan felt the ground shift. Her eyes darted toward the other staff behind the counter. A younger teller, barely out of college, pale and nervous, whispered to another employee, "Security's on standby." The words felt like ice water down her spine. Her skin prickled. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't threatening. But she was now being perceived as a risk simply for advocating for herself. She looked around the room, saw the customers pretending not to watch, saw the woman near the entrance glance away quickly, saw a man shaking his head, whispering to someone beside him. She was being labeled before their eyes, her narrative twisted by the ones in power. She took a step back from the counter. "So that's it," she asked. "You're not going to process my account, despite having every document, despite meeting every threshold, because I don't look the part?" Colin didn't answer. Cheryl smiled faintly. That maybe someone would stop seeing her as a disruption and start treating her like a client. Her arrival was met with the same sterile lighting, the same cold marble floors, and the same tense silence that seemed to settle every time she walked through the door. Cheryl was at her post, seated behind the glass with a mug of coffee and her usual expression of professional disdain. As soon as she saw Sloan, her shoulders stiffened. Sloan walked up calmly, her folder again in hand, her coat already removed as if to say, "I'm not going anywhere until this is finished." Cheryl looked up, sighed, and said nothing until Sloan spoke. "I'm here to finalize my application. You've had my documents for over a week, and there has been no progress. I'm not leaving this desk until I know what's being done and who is accountable for the delays." Cheryl pursed her lips. "We already told you, Ms. Merritt, your file is in review. Compliance takes time." "Then start the process now," Sloan replied sharply. "You can input my EIN and verify my corporate entity through the IRS system. You've had every opportunity to act, and all you've done is stonewall me." Cheryl turned to her computer, but didn't begin typing. "I need to verify a few other things first," she said vaguely. "The EIN can wait." Sloan narrowed her eyes. "Why? It's the first step. You know that." Cheryl didn't answer directly. Instead, she gave a little shrug and muttered just loudly enough, "People try all kinds of tricks. I don't rush just because someone comes in demanding special treatment." The comment dropped like a lead weight between them. Sloan's hands tightened on the folder. "Excuse me," she asked, her voice low but dangerous. Cheryl finally looked at her fully. "I said, we get a lot of applicants trying to game the system. Phony businesses, fake credentials. It's my job to be cautious." "And it's my job," Sloan said, "to hold institutions accountable when they use caution as a cover for discrimination." Cheryl's cheeks reddened slightly, but her posture remained smug. "Look, I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just saying we've seen all kinds. It's not personal." Sloan exhaled slowly through her nose. "Yes, it is." Cheryl clicked her mouse a few times without looking at Sloan. "Fine. I'll input your EIN, but don't expect miracles. These things take time." She began typing, but intentionally slowed her pace, pausing frequently, squinting at the screen like the process was unusually difficult. After a few minutes, she turned back to the folder and pulled out Sloan's business license. She examined it like a forgery, then abruptly tossed it onto the counter with a soft slap. "Try a credit union," she said, not even looking up. The act was so dismissive, so final, it took Sloan a full 2 seconds to process it. She stared at the license, sitting skewed on the glass like glitter. "What did you just say?" Cheryl shrugged. "I'm saying maybe you'd be more comfortable with a smaller bank. One that has time to walk you through the basics." That was the final crack in the dam. Sloan slowly picked up her license, tucked it back into the folder, and stood straighter. "I came here with everything required. I followed every step. You have denied me basic service, publicly humiliated me, and now you're suggesting I leave like a beggar who asked for too much. You've made it clear I don't belong here, not because of my qualifications, but because of who I am." Cheryl didn't flinch. "I don't make the rules." This time, she didn't come to be processed. She came to make a point. On the third day, just after 11 o'clock in the morning, she walked into Iron Trust Bank with no folder, no jacket, and no expression on her face. She wore a dark green silk blouse tucked into tailored black slacks, her hair pulled back, her posture effortless yet commanding. The same lobby, the same lighting, the same air of smug professionalism that instantly curdled the moment she stepped into view. Cheryl was seated at her station as usual, sipping coffee, tapping through emails with the indifference of someone certain of their superiority. When she looked up and saw Sloan, her mouth twitched into a smile, not a welcome, but of annoyance, as though her least favorite chore had walked back into her life. Sloan approached the desk, and for a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Cheryl finally broke the silence with a tone dipped in sarcasm. "I thought we settled this already. Or are we trying again for a sympathy account?" Sloan didn't respond. Instead, she unlocked her phone with a single tap and opened her banking application. Her eyes didn't leave Cheryl's face as she navigated the app with swift, silent precision. Cheryl frowned. "What are you doing?" Sloan said nothing. Her thumb tapped the final button, and she turned the phone around just long enough for Cheryl to see the numbers. $12 million, initiating a transfer from Harding Street Capital directly to an account bearing the name Merit Strategies, LLC. The moment her name flashed across the screen, Cheryl's condescension cracked. Her mouth opened slightly, then snapped shut. She looked toward her screen, confused, suspicious, and then back at the phone. What is this?" she asked, reaching hesitantly for her terminal. Sloan spoke for the first time. "I just wired $12 million to Iron Trust Bank. It should hit your system within the next few seconds. You'll want to pay attention to the incoming alert." As if on cue, a sharp-toned ping from Cheryl's terminal. She glanced down. Her face paled. She leaned closer, squinted, then widened her eyes as she saw the alert line populate across her screen. "Incoming corporate deposit, 12 million Merit Strategies, LLC." She read aloud without meaning to. Her fingers scrambled over the keyboard to refresh the feed. It's real," she whispered. "I told you that days ago," Sloan said coolly. "You just refused to believe me." Cheryl sat frozen. The line behind Sloan grew. A few customers began to notice the change in atmosphere, heads turning, eyes tracking the once dismissed woman who now stood like a queen reclaiming her stolen crown. Sloan's tone remained calm, but her words carried the weight of a gavel. "I've been humiliated, disrespected, profiled, and dismissed by you and your team for over a week. You asked for documentation. I gave it. You asked for proof. I brought it. You asked for silence. I answered with action. Cheryl still hadn't spoken. Her screen blinked again, confirming the funds had cleared and were available for account assignment. Robert Langston appeared from his glass office, alerted by the system flag. He walked toward the desk with his usual smirk, but it faltered when he saw Cheryl's expression and the alert on her monitor. "What's going on?" he asked. Cheryl barely moved her lips. She just wired $12 million into the branch. Merit Strategies. Robert blinked. "From where?" "Harding Street Capital," Cheryl said faintly. "It hit just now." Robert turned to Sloan. His voice was now careful, almost respectful. "Ms. Merritt, I had no idea. You had every idea," Sloan interrupted. "You just didn't care. You looked at me and decided I wasn't worth your time. You called my business a joke." Sloan didn't move. She didn't need to. The balance in the bank had shifted, not just in dollars, but in power, in presence, in perception. She turned slowly, facing the entire lobby with the composed authority of someone used to commanding rooms, far more consequential than this one. Her voice, calm but commanding, cut through the quiet like a blade. "For those of you watching, because I know you are, I'd like to introduce myself properly. My name is Sloan Merritt. I'm the founder and CEO of Merit Strategies, a fintech company backed by Harding Street Capital and Pacific Equinox, two of the most respected venture firms in the U.S. We just closed a Series B funding round, $12 million, wired here to this very bank." She paused long enough to let the words land, long enough for Cheryl to visibly shrink behind the counter, and long enough for Robert's face to harden in alarm. "I came to Iron Trust because I was considering consolidating my company's financial operations here. We process high-volume, high-frequency transactions, and I thought this institution was equipped to handle that. I was wrong." Someone in the line near the entrance gasped. A young woman in a red blazer, phone in hand, angled her camera slightly to the side and whispered, "Oh my God, she's serious." Another customer, a man in a denim jacket, said louder, "You just played yourself, lady." And though he didn't specify who, the glance at Cheryl left no doubt. Sloan looked straight at Cheryl now. "You dismissed me because of how I look. You questioned my legitimacy, ignored my credentials, and mocked my business. You raised your voice so others would doubt me. You called security." She turned briefly toward the guard, "not because I posed a threat, but because I demanded respect. And when you ran out of excuses, you told me to try a credit union, as if I were some girl selling lip gloss out of her apartment." Cheryl tried to open her mouth, but no words came. Robert stepped in, posture suddenly rigid. "Ms. Merritt, I can assure you this does not represent Iron Trust values." "We don't," Sloan said, lifting one hand. "You've had every opportunity to correct this. Every visit, every email, every document was a chance to get it right. Instead, you let your team violate every standard of client service and basic human decency. This was never about policy. This was about power. You abused yours. I just used mine." The red blazer woman near the entrance was now openly recording. Her voice narrated softly. "Black woman CEO just flipped this bank on its head. This is going viral." Sloan took a deep breath. Her voice softened, but her words were no less potent. "I've already started the process of moving these funds. They'll be gone before close of business. Iron Trust will not be managing 1 cent of my company's capital. I'll also be issuing a public statement about why we chose to bank elsewhere. It'll mention this location by name. It'll mention yours." She looked at Robert, then at Cheryl. "And it will go live in 2 hours." Robert's face twitched. Cheryl had gone pale. The junior teller who'd once whispered about calling security now stood awkwardly at her station, avoiding eye contact. The security guard shifted his weight, no longer watching Sloan, now unsure who the real threat had ever been. A man at a nearby desk muttered, "Good for her," and a few people murmured in agreement. Sloan looked around once more, her gaze calm, collected, but unmistakably fierce. She had not raised her voice once. She had not slammed a single fist. And yet, The room now listened to her with the reverence of a courtroom. The moment where Sloan named her company, cited the $12 million wire, and then announced she was walking away from the bank had already been looped thousands of times across Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram. The hashtags began trending. Hashtag merit strategies, hashtag banking while black, hashtag power and grace. Commentary poured in from every corner of the internet, from financial analysts praising her poise to activists calling out systemic bias. Screenshots of the bank's address and staff directory surfaced within the hour, and people were already identifying Cheryl and Robert by name. By the time Iron Trust's regional corporate office saw the trending clip, their communications team was already scrambling to draft a response. Their internal inboxes had filled with press inquiries, and clients were beginning to reach out asking if the viral video reflected company values. In a rushed attempt at damage control, Iron Trust issued a public apology by 3:15 p.m. Their official Twitter account posted a formal statement acknowledging that a recent client had received inadequate service not reflective of our commitment to diversity and professionalism. The post did not name Sloan, but everyone knew exactly who it was about. Internally, however, the consequences were immediate and more direct. Cheryl Dobbins was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Robert Langston, along with Colin Leach, whose voice had been captured in another shorter clip saying, "Let's not waste time if it's not a high-net client," were also suspended without pay while the bank reviewed its handling of high-tier account applications. Emails were sent to all Iron Trust branch staff reminding them of corporate conduct expectations, and every employee was instructed to complete a mandatory bias awareness module by end of week. Sloan, meanwhile, didn't wait for Iron Trust to make its moves. As soon as she exited the building that morning, she called a scheduled meeting with her communications director and PR strategist. By early afternoon, Merit Strategies issued their own statement, announcing that they had finalized an exclusive banking partnership with Falcon National, Iron Trust's closest and most aggressive competitor. The statement was brief but intentional, citing the firm's commitment to respect, inclusivity, and professionalism as cornerstones of every client interaction. The statement continued, "We believe our financial partners should reflect our values and stand with us in creating equitable economic ecosystems. We look forward to building with Falcon National, whose team has demonstrated not only financial expertise but human decency." That statement alone generated a media storm. Falcon National responded swiftly with a tweet welcoming Merit Strategies to their client family, tagging Sloan directly and praising her leadership. Within minutes, the internet had declared a victor in what many were now calling the financial reckoning of Iron Trust. News outlets picked up the story. A Business Newswire article titled "Fintech CEO Exposes Bias at Elite Bank, Then Wires $12 million to Their Rival" hit the front page of financial news aggregators. Television news producers began reaching out to Sloan's team for interviews. Iron Trust watched helplessly as their public perception unraveled. By the end of the day, stock discussion boards were already speculating if the scandal would affect their quarterly earnings. Internally, whispers of lawsuits and class action reviews began circulating among employees and clients alike. Meanwhile, in the private Slack channels of Merit Strategies, employees celebrated. The message boards lit up with comments like, "You're a legend, and that's how you handle business," as Sloan's team rallied around her. They had always known their CEO was powerful, but today she had reminded them she was unstoppable. Still, Sloan remained quiet as the night settled in. She watched the flood of coverage, the reposts, the endless commentary, and felt no joy in the unraveling of Cheryl or Colin or Robert. What she felt was something else entirely, a deep, anchored certainty that what had happened needed to happen, not for revenge, but for truth. The story that began with condescension and dismissal did not end with corporate statements or trending hashtags. While the world moved on to its next outrage, the people inside the story were left to sit with the weight of what they had done and what they had ignored for too long. Cheryl Dobbins had never considered herself a bad person. She followed rules. She worked hard. She believed in structure, in hierarchy, in order. But the week after the video of Sloan went viral, Cheryl found herself sitting alone in her kitchen with a letter in one hand and a severance check in the other. Iron Trust's HR had framed it as a voluntary resignation encouraged by mutual agreement, but she knew what it meant. She had been made an example. Her face had circulated online. Her words had been replayed endlessly, dissected, mocked, condemned. She stopped answering phone calls. She deactivated her LinkedIn. Friends became quiet. Colleagues distanced themselves. Her husband offered support, but even his words felt hollow, like comfort meant to patch over a wound he couldn't see. Cheryl spent the first month furious. She watched the video repeatedly, at first to defend herself, then to understand how others could have seen her actions as anything more than doing her job. But the more she watched, the more she couldn't look away from the truth, not just in the words she said, but in how she said them. The way she never looked Sloan in the eye, the way her voice dripped with presumption, the dismissive wave, the casual cruelty of suggesting a credit union, not as a helpful alternative, but as a dismissal. What chilled her most was not the backlash, but the realization that she had never questioned herself until now. It wasn't just one moment. It was a pattern, and she had been part of it. One day, while scrolling mindlessly through her news feed, Cheryl saw a flyer for a local racial equity and justice workshop. Normally, she would have scrolled past it, but something, shame, curiosity, maybe both, made her pause. She signed up anonymously. She sat in the back of the room during the first session, arms folded, heart guarded. The facilitators didn't shame. They didn't blame. They talked. They taught. They told stories. And slowly, Cheryl began to listen. The more she heard, the more the veneer of her own righteousness began to crack. She remembered a black woman who'd applied for a loan last year, how she dismissed her as not prepared. She remembered a Latino man who struggled with English, how she'd rushed him through paperwork. A pattern emerged, and it pointed squarely at her. She wasn't just doing her job. She was upholding a system that quietly told people like Sloan they didn't belong. And worse, she never questioned it. Months passed. Cheryl kept attending the workshops, then began volunteering. She read books she once scoffed at. She listened to voices she used to tune out. She didn't speak much. She was learning how much she'd missed by speaking too soon. Her pride eroded, replaced by something harder but more honest: accountability. She applied for jobs, not in banking, but in education outreach. Her resume got her interviews, but her reputation still lingered like smoke. Still, she kept going. And then came the seminar. It was a fall afternoon in a downtown convention center, packed with professionals from finance, tech, education, all gathered for a symposium on diversity and inclusion in corporate leadership. Cheryl didn't plan to speak. She was there to listen, to learn. She sat near the back, notebook in hand, dressed simply, anonymously. But when the keynote speaker took the stage, Cheryl's breath caught. It was her, Sloan Merritt. Wearing a navy blue suit, radiating calm authority, Sloan addressed the crowd with the same clarity she had shown that day at Iron Trust. She spoke about systemic exclusion, about the silent barriers that didn't look like slurs but sounded like not the right fit. She spoke about how dignity could be stolen in moments and reclaimed in others. She never mentioned Cheryl by name, but Cheryl felt every word. After the session, as people mingled, Cheryl waited. She didn't approach right away. She stood at a respectful distance, watching Sloan speak with attendees, laughing, connecting, exuding the very leadership Cheryl once refused to see. Finally, their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. Cheryl stepped forward slowly, carefully. "Ms. Merritt," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "You may not remember me, but I remember," Sloan said, not coldly, but without rescue. Cheryl nodded. "I deserve that. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, not for the PR, for the assumptions, for how I treated you. I've learned a lot since then. I still am." Sloan studied her. Her gaze wasn't angry. It was steady. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "I hope you keep learning." Cheryl nodded, not expecting forgiveness, but grateful for the chance to acknowledge the harm. She didn't ask for a photo, didn't offer a handshake. She simply turned and walked away, feeling something unfamiliar but important: peace. Sloane watched her go, then turned back to the circle around her. The conversation resumed. The moment passed, but its meaning lingered. The story that began in humiliation ended not in vengeance, but in transformation. Not every villain stays one. Some recognize the mirror when it's held up to them. Some choose to change. And some, like Sloane, don't just survive injustice. They rise from it and teach the world how to be better. The end. If you found this story powerful or thought-provoking, be sure to like and subscribe to stay connected for more cinematic narratives that challenge injustice and uplift resilience. What did you think about Sloane's journey? Did the ending resonate with you? Let us know in the comments below. Your thoughts matter. And tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to see how far this story reaches.